Today's guest is Dan Mannix, not the Mannix you're used to seeing on television, but nonetheless a formidable executive in the world of sport and entertainment. Dan and I have known each other, I'm going to say 10 years-ish, and that's a good story as well. But Dan started his career back in the late 80s, early 90s, Astrodome in Houston, then joined the NBA in New York, went on loan to the Atlanta Olympic Games to run the basketball competition there. We're going to hear about that. But really, the story of Dan Mannix is his entrepreneurial spirit and the fact that he's been leading his own agencies, plural, for the last 25 plus years. Lead Dog Marketing to start, Underdog Ventures now. He's going to also explain the dog theme. So, Dan, can't thank you enough for joining today. Welcome to the Best Boss Ever podcast series.
Carl, excited to be here and honored and humbled to be invited. I was intimidated listening to some of your guests, and some of which I feel like are mentors and bosses of mine. So I'm like, hopefully I round it out with some less interesting stories, because you've had some amazing people on. So thank you.
Well, no, listen, the Dan Mannix I know has more than a few interesting stories, and we're going to get to a few of those. So, we'll start at the beginning and sort of quickly roll through how you got to where you are. So, the Astrodome.
Well, senior year of college, University of Richmond, Spiders. I was taking a sports marketing class. Really didn't know what I wanted to do. I partied a little too much in college. It's an understatement. And sat on the bench in sports, which was humbling. And had this sports marketing class, and everybody who came in and spoke said, oh, you got to get your master's in sports if you want a job. And that just was the theme from every guest speaker. And I'm like, that must be a different way. Unfortunately, a student on campus had died in an unfortunate accident. And a friend of mine, Jim Pfeiffer, who ended up working at Madison Square Garden and the Hawks and Thrashers, we put on a memorial run for the student because we felt like there should have been more done. And so we ended up putting on this event, got the school involved. All the principles, the years later when I taught a class at NYU, I'm like, all the foundations of planning a birthday party or an event, they all apply, whether it's how big or small. So we got Gatorade. I wrote a letter to Gatorade and got T-shirts donated and put on our first event. And I mentioned that because my first interview, I'd been a lifeguard, dishwasher, parked cars, didn't necessarily have the resumes that every sports graduate student has today, where they have unbelievable resumes and internships. Although I did have officer candidate school in the Marines, which I did one summer, which was a great life experience. But a fraternity brother, this is where I try and pay it forward, because I was fortunate to get my foot in the door. His father worked at the Astrodome. So I sent letters off, and I called when I graduated and said, I'd love to come interview. And he said, well, come through sometime. I was going cross country with three fraternity brothers. He said, well, when you're coming by Texas, swing by and we can interview. And I got off the phone. And for whatever reason, my dad was home from work that day, which was so lucky, because he said, who knows? This is a senior guy, if he's going to be there when you're in town. So I called him right back and I said, I'll fly there whenever you tell me. I'll pay for myself. And so I got a trip out there, 2 days of interviews. And then I proceeded, this was before all the tech, while I was going cross country, calling from payphones all over America. And I got to be really tight with his assistant, Alice, who was just a fantastic human being. In Telluride, Colorado, on the side of a road, on a payphone, I got an administrative assistant job and proceeded to pack my car up and drove, not knowing how to drive stick. When I left, I remember my mom looking out sitting on the front steps, stalling like 5 times, so she was panicked because I didn't really know how to drive stick. So I got myself to Houston, walked in the day after Labor Day, and when I said I'm here for work, they were all whispering. I literally thought, oh my God, I don't have a job. It took like an hour for them to find a place for me to sit. And knock on wood, best first job anybody could ever had. When you talk about bosses, I had so fortunate to have about 5 people there who took me under their wing that were foundational things from my career, from work, but work and life, and just values and ethics that I carry with me today and try and pay it forward.
That's a super important aspect of the early days of anyone's career. We all, I dare say we all, as young people, know people that are 1 or 2 clicks away from whether it's a senior exec at the Astrodome or pick one. The difference between the Dan Mannixes of the world and others is the willingness, the discipline, the intentionality of being willing to make the connection, following up with the connection when an opportunity presents itself, to use a phrase, drive your truck through the open door, right? Because you don't know how long that door is going to be open. That's a great way to start this, Dan. And for all the young people listening to this podcast, this is a very key moment in your emerging career. You got to be broad. You've got to be deep. You've got to be willing to write the letter, make the phone call, send the email, connect via LinkedIn in this world of tech enablement today. And to the extent you're willing to do that, good things will happen. So you spend a bit of time in Houston, then you end up at the NBA, which I want to, we all need to know how that happened.
I think there is a theme, and it's funny, years later, I taught sports entrepreneurship at NYU, and that theme of like, put yourself out there. When the door closes, go through the window. As Sue Roden, the founder of Wise, always says, professional persistence. You don't want to be John Favreau in Swingers and leave 10 voicemails in 24 hours and never call me again. Even that job at the Astrodome, it's an administrative assistant job. It was, an embarrassingly low salary. I must have talked to Alice 50 times over the summer. Could never get the exec on the phone, but I built a rapport with her, and she kind of took me under her wing and would guide me when to call back. But I could have, after 20 calls, just said, oh, this is never going to happen. And it was, but same thing with NBA and moving to Toronto. I raised my hand when I was at the NBA saying, hey, if we're sending anybody to Toronto, I'd be game. And who knows, later when I was in a meeting, or they were in a meeting deciding, and they're like, that Mannix kid said he'd move there, let's send him. Who knows how it happened. But with the NBA, I sent long letters. I'm too verbose, one of my weaknesses, but I sent 2-page letters to 3 VPs, one of which, Steve Mills, became one of my lifelong mentors, and also to David Stern. And I said in my letter to David, I wanted to be commissioner someday. And I sent him copies of all the other letters. And at first I got the standard form letter back from HR with one line saying, thank you, received your resume, but you're a cheesy guy from Long Island. No thanks. And so I didn't stop at that. I called a couple of the people, and I called one guy, Rob Levine, who was head of NBA Asia, I think at the time, or international. And I got him right before the holidays. And he said, hey, we may be hiring in the new year. This was when I was 2.5 years into the Astrodome, when I started to think I want to move back to New York. And he said, call me after the holidays and we'll talk. I was home that holiday telling my friends I may have an opportunity at the NBA because I'm a lifelong Knicks fan and just obsessed with basketball. Called him back in the new year, and literally it was Rob's moved to Japan to head up our NBA Asia. And I was like, okay, well, that opportunity's gone. And then literally months later, I got a different letter from who ended up becoming my boss at the NBA saying, hey, we're looking to grow in the next couple months. Wanted to let you know, and if you're ever in New York, we'd love to meet up. I called right away and said, I had a theme of this. I've made up, manufactured a bunch of trips saying, I'll be in New York anytime you want, and ended up flying up to New York. I'll never forget because the elevator got stuck when I was going over to meet one of my interviews. This was how small the NBA was at the time. I was interviewing for a senior coordinator position, and I was going over the second day to meet with Russ Granick, the deputy commissioner. I got in the elevator with a woman at the Sheraton Hotel. I'll never forget. We hit the buttons, and the elevator froze. So we were calling the phone. It took a while. They had to, I don't know if we were in there for 10 minutes or 20, but it felt like 2 hours. Sprinted over. I think I was still huffing and puffing when I met him, probably sweating. I was like, I'm never going to get this job. But luckily, got the offer and moved back to New York in the special events department to start.
Oh, that's good stuff. Again, persistence, professional persistence, right? So key. So you probably did get dispatched to Toronto.
I did.
And then what do you end up spending, 5-ish years at the NBA?
I was almost 7, but it was kind of I ended up becoming the person who got sent to places. So I was so lucky, and this is a theme, like when you're in situations and if you're proactive, luck happens. But I started in September of 92. So I wish I'd started in June of 92, because that was when everybody was coming back off the high of probably the most incredible NBA experience and Olympic experience of the Dream Team in Barcelona. So I start in September. Everybody's kind of like fatigued after this big event, and they kind of didn't have like a lot of stuff for me to do. So I'm trying to find work for the first month and a half, 2 months, and then Jam Session got approved. So this was like when leagues didn't have fan festivals, which is kind of crazy to think about. And it got the Jam Session in October. They said we're going to have the first one, and it was in Salt Lake City during NBA All-Star. And a gentleman named Ski Austin, who's one of my lifelong mentors, was heading up Jam Session. And I ended up just becoming like his gopher and worked with him on everything. I mean, I don't think I've ever worked harder than those couple months, 7 in the morning till 11 at night, almost every day. But it was so new, the Jam Session, that I got to work with almost every department at the NBA. And you don't know things when you're going through them at the time, how lucky you are. All the relationships that I built and all those departments I was working with then. My first clients when I started Lead Dog, I had no experience at an agency. I was clueless related to agencies, to be honest, when I started it. All the first clients were people that I used to work with at the NBA who trusted me from previous work. Otherwise, probably would have gone out of business after a year, which we almost went out of business many times anyway because of all the mistakes I made, but we navigated through the different things. So
well, you just described the world of agencies, right? You're one client away from bust and you're one client away from boom. And that's how
Absolutely.
it is as an entrepreneur. So you've ticked off quite a few names, and then you're about to start your own agency, and you're naive enough to have no idea what you're getting yourself into, which we all live. So were there 2 or 3, not necessarily the names of the folks, but the key learnings that you took with you that gave you the willingness, the confidence, the risk tolerance to start your own agency?
Yeah, the funny thing, and you asked about the dog name, the first seeds of Lead Dog came from actually the bar being set low. And what I mean by that is I was at the Astrodome, and after I'd started to worked my butt off, started to build trust in the senior leaders, they started giving me different big projects. And things I had no experience in. The Oilers were looking to move out of Houston, and I suddenly was analyzing leases and revenues of parking and concessions and calling every 23 GMs of other, MetLife and Superdome, Silverdome. It was crazy. I was like, oh my God, I'm so imposter, which I still feel like an imposter today with many things. But so I approached my boss and said, we should bid on the World Cup. I had played soccer my whole life, sat on the bench my freshman year at Richmond. And he said to me, Mannix, I think he used some curse words, Mannix, you're an effing idiot. The World Cup's played on grass and Astrodome was turf. And I said, well, let me look into it. So, which was part of what I learned when people give you a chance to look into things, even if you thought I was going to, fall flat on my face. Long story short, ended up finding an agronomist at Texas A&M that we got the Superdome and Silverdome to 3 domes to do a grass test. We did at the Superdome in New Orleans. Proved that grass could go for 26 straight days with special lights and so I ended up overseeing the bid for the city of Houston. Unfortunately, Detroit ended up being the first dome. They got selected. But at the time, they assigned an agency at the very end to help me with the bid. And I was doing every piece of it, getting letters from the mayor's office and writing the bid. I'm kind of a procrastinator, so whenever the date was due, I was like packing the FedEx boxes up like 5 minutes before. But I remember thinking, God, this agency, I won't say who, that was assigned to work with me, had one of the sports teams in Houston as a client, I think had the convention bureau, and the guy didn't do anything to help. And he was, older, I was 24, and I'm thinking, wow, if this guy can have his own agency, I can have my own company someday. And I had a t-shirt that I worked out in all the time that said, if you're not the lead dog, the scenery never changes. And I kind of liked that spirit of being out front, being the one who, sets the path while others are waiting for someone else to take the lead. So I started doodling my initials with my 2 college roommates who also are in sports. And then I was like, naming a company after myself is not my thing. that's a separate thing. So I came up with lead dog, and I'm like, well, let me add marketing because that sounds broader. And I'm like, let me add group because that sounds bigger, even though this was me at 24 doodling. And then, I got the job at the NBA, and it was kind of like a dormant thing in the back of my head for years. And I was fortunate after the Olympics to switch over to be part of the launch of the WNBA. And then after launching the WNBA, when I quit to go backpacking, which was a whole separate life experience, I came back with a long goatee from not having shaved, and I got pulled into a Major League Baseball event, and that was the first lead dog event. I'd incorporated the name, and I worked a week production in Fenway Park. So felt out of my element because I'd been backpacking for 10 months, so I shaved the long goatee. I remember being at LaGuardia, I think like shaking because I was like, felt like I was like out of the wild from being in Thailand and Nepal, and suddenly I'm in production meetings, but it was like one of those 6 hours into production meetings, it clicked back in, and baseball became our client for the next 8 years, helping to produce the All-Star Game. So it's kind of a good first client.
Very cool. So now we know where lead dog came from, reminiscent of lead, follow, or get out of the way. But let's talk a little bit about, I want to go back and elaborate the Olympic experience you had. When we were sort of talking this through off camera, you talked about being on loan from the NBA to the Atlanta Organizing Committee. You went down there for round numbers 18 months, and your role was, if I got this right, was to organize and oversee the Olympic basketball tournament in '96.
Yeah, the Olympic and the Paralympics. There was about, I don't know, like the 26 Olympic sports, I think. There was, eight of us that ran both Olympics and Paralympics. And actually, I almost ran wheelchair rugby as well. I wanted to, but the head of Olympic sports wouldn't let me. They thought it was going to be too much stuff. But Paralympics, by the way, one of the most inspiring experiences I've had in my life. I have a signed ball. That's my prized possession. I'm not big on I never get autographs or anything like that from anything I've worked on, but Trooper Johnson and Reggie Colton, 2 players on the '96 Paralympic team. I have a signed ball from a test event we did that I'm very proud of. But yeah, no, it was surreal. But it also was foundational for, even though it wasn't an agency, I moved down there, had to build a team out of 40 people, 400 volunteers. I was 29 at the time, and again, I felt like imposter syndrome. Would be in the heads of each sport would be in meetings, and most of the heads of the sports were like 25 years in their sport, in their 40s and 50s, which, at the time felt old. Now I'm like, that's young as a 58-year-old graybeard. But I think in general, I try and go into situations where I'm a big believer of trust is earned, not granted. So it doesn't matter that I'd run an NBA All-Star weekend and I moved to Toronto and helped run the World Championships of basketball with John Bittoff, the owner of the Raptors, who amazing entrepreneur. So my mindset is I have to trust is earned. You have to win people over, and was fortunate to get some amazing people to work with who joined the team. And when actually I started Lead Dog, Charlie Schwartz, who worked with me at the Olympics, was my first partner. Brett McTavish, who was on my basketball Olympic staff, was one of the first Lead Dog people. Beth Jowdy, an intern who picked me up at the airport one time for the WBCA, Women's Basketball Coaches Association. We had moved from Atlanta to New York. It was kind of like the early staff of Lead Dog, where people, and there was a theme there of there's nothing like, it's like sports. There's nothing like knowing who your teammates are and having teammates that don't all have the same skill sets. I told my boss at the NBA, if I'm ever going to start an agency, I wanted to tell him in advance, I'm definitely going to try and steal Karen. And when I started Lead Dog, I approached Karen. She wouldn't meet with me at first because she's like, you're a 3-person startup. She's like, she was running the NBA's big events, but convinced her to have lunch with me finally, and she grudgingly did, and then made sure she couldn't accept counteroffers from David Stern because I knew David would have her in her office right away, which he did. So I'm like, I don't want to piss off David. So yeah, we're very fortunate to to me, the collaboration of who's on your team and having different skill sets and different life and work perspectives is what makes a team special.
Well, yeah, and what people, other than those pretty well steeped in the Olympic infrastructure, might not know that when you reference world championships, it really has nothing at all to do with the NBA. It has everything to do with the International Basketball Federation, FIBA, which is the organization that's also responsible for overseeing the Olympic basketball tournament. USA Basketball, the USA Olympic team, but FIBA, the International Federation, oversees the entire tournament. So with that experience, it doesn't surprise me at all that you would go on loan to Atlanta, because you already sort of had the ins and outs of what the International Federation superstructure, if you will, looked like.
It did help, definitely, that from having run, again, I was fortunate, so fortunate. I think back, it's crazy, at a young age, I helped run the McDonald's Open in 1993. That was an international tournament that the Phoenix Suns, and when Barkley played in, great experience. And then actually two people I met there in Italy. I produced a tournament in Bologna, Italy, and a couple of the people that I worked with there with the Olympics, you needed people that spoke multiple languages. Actually, Mike D'Antoni, longtime NBA coach, was former coach of Buckler Bologna. His wife, Laurel, became one of our interpreters at the Olympics because she spoke like 5 languages. So, I had the trust of Florian Waniger and Reiner, the folks from FIBA, and so there was a history with them, as well as, which is amazing, Jim Tooley, great human being, Sean Ford, Carol Callan. Amazingly, they're all USA Basketball, and they're still, to this day, at USA Basketball and doing great things, which when you work with people that, like the 3 of them, and that have high integrity, again, you want to do right by them and be in service of what their goals and needs are within a big event like the Olympics. So it's a lot of different constituents that touched it.
Got it. Well, listen, the common thread here that's obvious is you are, for lack of a better term, have big events in your DNA. You've been in lots of places where global events, national events have taken place. You've been in the center of not only organizing and producing, but also building a staff, as you referenced in Atlanta. With baseball as a client in the early days of Lead Dog, walk us through the sort of startup mentality, because a lot of folks fancy themselves as possible entrepreneurs, potential entrepreneurs. It's not for the faint of heart on the one hand. On the other hand, you never learn more than you do as an entrepreneur, and figuring out how to make payroll when there's no way you're going to make payroll. We all have lived that. So let's find new scenery as the Lead Dog Marketing Group.
Yeah, no, you just hit on so many things. One, again, when I think of things that at the time I didn't realize how lucky I was for certain things to happen that had an impact. So one was, I just come back. The Lead Dog first business plan was like a page of notes of people who I wanted to reconnect with. This was before LinkedIn and being able to tell 1,000 people you're back. I worked the Boston All-Century team in '99 with Brian O'Gara, who's still a baseball great guy. But I then was like, okay, all of a sudden it's August and my grandmother was sick, and I was like, how am I figuring this out? I was meeting with some folks. I remember I went to the elevator once, and I'm hitting the button, and the guy comes back out and he says, hey, if you're getting an office for Lead Dog, by the way, I have a guy you should meet with for coffee. Thank God that happened. I met Jim McPhillamy for coffee. I rented him a desk when we found our first office. And Jim had worked 20 years at agencies, and he was a very direct, brilliant guy. And very direct. He told you what was on his mind. So he was at this desk in the front. We had this small office that even that, I remember going into the space and being like, this is the right space. And I heard people walking up the stairs, and I'm like, I'll take it. I had this momentary... And I was like, these big wooden desks. I'm like, can you throw in the desk too? I thought maybe these look heavy. She's not going to want to carry these out here. So we kept her desks. But I'd be on the phone with people, and Jim knew the agency business. I had no idea how to price, I'd run big events. But I'll never forget being on with a friend of mine who had won a gold medal in the 2000 Olympics in Sydney. And she was asking me for my advice of who to represent her. She had won gold and wanted to get an agent. And I've never been a fan of the agent business as much as part of it, the dynamics of it and some of the ethics. And I was like, well, you want someone small who can take care of you, but the big agencies can have a network, but you're going to be one of many. And Jim, of course, he's hearing me on the conversation, and he screams across the room, you should represent her. And she heard that, and she goes, well, what about you? I'm like, oh, we don't represent athletes, and you're a friend. And anyway, she's like, well, I trust you. And so we ended up representing Tara Knott, who's 5'1", 105 pounds, won gold in weightlifting in Sydney. So you never know where things going to happen. There was times where like I had a price on something and Jim would be like, you should double it. And I doubled the price for this big thing and they didn't have any qualms. So I'm like, oh, I should have charged more. So he was amazing. But to your point, otherwise, I think in some ways this may sound crazy, but thank God I didn't have more seasoned business advisors in the beginning. Because we went from 3 people to 6 really quickly and brought in Beth Jowdy, who worked with me at the Olympics, and Karen from the NBA. And suddenly the internet crash happened. And then 9/11 happened. And I didn't know any better. There was no thought in my mind that like, oh, we got to let people go. I'm like, no, they've moved here. They're part of our team. So I started, it wasn't that large of a 401k, but started dipping into 401k to pay payroll. And just like, I don't know, I didn't know any better. I think back now, if I had an advisor, they'd be like, you got to cut people right away. Well, we didn't. And I can't tell you the number of pitches. I'll never forget for the WUSA, the women's soccer, the first in 2002, getting off on the elevator and thinking, if we don't win this pitch, I don't know how we're making another 2 months of paying any bills. And luckily, I'm obsessed with the number 6 from Julia Serving and my birthday and Beckenbauer for the Cosmos. And I see they're on the 6th floor. I'm like, okay, we're going to win this pitch. But, so we won that pitch. It was 6 months to help produce the first WSA championship in Foxborough Stadium and Classic Entrepreneurial Startup. That would finish. And then we're like, okay, now, because we were the account teams too, then it's like, now we got to find the next thing to survive. So, there was so many of those things. And even as we got bigger, I'd be on a street corner and I'd get a call and saying, if we don't get that check from WWE tomorrow, who's a longtime client, we're not going to be able to make payroll tomorrow. It's part of why, I have no hair left.
Listen, we all have that. So obviously you figured it out because you I'm going to say start Lead Dog in 99, 2000, and you run it very successfully for the better part of 20 years. And then our mutually great friend, Harlan Stone, gives you a call. He at the time has built and sold 2 or 3 agencies. So he's the poster child for how to do what you were doing. And the most recent acquisition was, CSM, London-based. Harlan and Matt Vandrow were sort of co-CEOs, and Harlan had a remit in the U.S. to acquire burgeoning, successful agencies. So tell us that story. Because I've heard it from the Harlan side, but I want to hear it from your side.
Well, first off, when you talk about best boss ever, Harlan's in the Mount Rushmore for me, and just one of, to me, I always think, success and all this stuff, they can get caught up. And you said something earlier about me that's like, I think too often in work in general, but in sports business in general, people get too caught up in titles or when people have had, I'll put in quotes, success. To me, with Harlan, the biggest thing I've learned is like just as a human being, how he treats people. And I aspire to have that impact on people. So I'll digress for a second. Every time I get off the phone with Harlan, my wife will know that it's Harlan because she's like, oh, you're on with Harlan? I'm like, how do you know? She's like, because I can tell you always feel like better and lighter after talking to Harlan. And that doesn't mean, believe me, he could be direct and I'm long-winded, as you know. Right now, he would have already cut me off because I go on too long and he's clear and to the point. But I've really tried to apply that, and I think, wow, like if that was on my tombstone, if when people had interactions with me, you feel better walking away from it, it's something I try and apply to situations. But I didn't really answer your question. So it was crazy as we were growing over the years, and we got into this mode really post-recession as well, like 2009, where we went on a rocket ship. And one year we added 30 people. We were winning pitches, planes, trains, and automobiles. And there was separate challenges of that, because like that was happening when my son was born in 2009. So there's a whole separate of how work-life balance, which, and just hearing Val Ackerman, one of my mentors, talk last week about the balance of that and the sacrifices you make. Those are real, obviously. But early on, when we had no reason for people started approaching me about acquiring Lead Dog. and just wasn't of interest. We were growing. We had this exciting, again, team. And the year before we got acquired by CSM, a group approached. And they were pretty aggressive about it. And all of a sudden, like, they're throwing out numbers and financial. And it was like, wow, we'd always been focused on trying to be the best agency in the world, right? And not the biggest, not the most profitable necessarily, but the best service solutions agency, and known for, like, if we worked with them, they knew we were going to try, our best always to come up with solutions and come through for people. But the year before, all of a sudden I felt like I started getting greedy because this group was laying out stuff. And it really was like this moment where it was like, wow, like, could sell the company. And, I wasn't 30 anymore and had a family. But I also, like, had this moment where it was like, wow. My wife said to me with this group, there was like, because they kept trying to pick away at us and felt like they were calling out more our flaws in some ways than our strengths. And she was like, can we curse on this podcast? Is that?
Yeah.
My wife's like,
no, there are no CC&Rs on this one.
We had a meeting with the group I brought two of my partners. We had this, like, 3-hour evening meeting. And I came home that night and I was telling my wife about it. And she was like, related to this other agency, she said, they're saying they want to buy you, but while they're walking you down the aisle, they're basically telling you you're ugly as shit. Like, I was like, interesting. So the next morning, I called the very mercurial founder of this company, who could have totally kicked my ass because he was this big human being, I'll say. I won't say who they were. But and I said, hey, I'm terrible at breaking up. So I was like, don't want to move forward, and had this, like, awkward. And then, of course, the next day after that, I said no. A huge pitch we were in for Porsche that was going to be, like, this big new account. We lost. And then, so, of course, I thought the world was falling apart. But then I'm on my way to Hershey, Pennsylvania for a pitch, and I get this email from Harlan Stone. And I had never met Harlan. I mean, he's like the Michael Jordan of our industry, as you know. But Harlan and I met, and we were like, met for 3 hours. And, I don't know if it was like into the second hour, or it was like, you had me at hello. We cut to the chase and said what was important to me. And he said, give me a week, and came back. And it just felt right. And you mentioned Matt Vandro. Matt Vandro, talk about thoughtful leaders. He was my boss when I became CEO of North America for CSM. He was global CEO, and learned so much from him. His grace and style and leadership, his leadership qualities. He's amazing, and think the world of him, and was very fortunate with Harlan. And look, Harlan was the first person I approached about Underdog to become an investor, and ended up being on our board. Now he's a top 10 tennis player, 60 plus, which is amazing. Not to sound dramatic, but just always feel indebted to Harlan of how he believed in me and still does. And I'm sure, Carl, you feel the same way I know about him. But when people in our lives, in all walks of life, you should just gratitude feel of people that have my back, and hopefully it's, they know it's reciprocal, that I'll run through walls for people. But fortunate to have a lot of great mentors and people that I've learned so much from.
Well, you're not the only one to call Harlan Stone out as the top. He and I have known each other for, not even say how long, but a really long time. And I've had always great respect and admiration for not only what he accomplished in business, but the way he accomplished it and his leadership style. And you mentioned the self-deprecation of Harlan, and he's still one of my most favorite people in the industry, even though he claims to be retired. You and I both know that's only partly true. So, having gone through a couple of merger and acquisition episodes myself, most recently 13 months ago when Legends acquired ASM Global, I was at ASM Global full-time there in the commercial partnership group. Obviously no longer there. There's only one of maybe 20 senior leaders at ASM that's still left in the fold. But all that said, you agree to get acquired by CSM. Harlan runs the USA business for a period of time. That mantle then passes to you as Harlan steps back from that. So how long actually did you stay in the CSM fold before you left to start Underdog?
Yeah, I mean, first off, when you get the baton passed from Harlan to me, it's kind of like going from like I don't know, Walt Frazier to a Division III, guy who played 7 minutes a game. So it's like I'm screwed to try and fill those shoes. But again, back to Harlan and Matt Vandro. Matt, I'm a big believer of coaching and leaders that you don't coach everybody the same way. And Matt and I have very different styles. He's this classy, thoughtful, just I think of the word grace with him and integrity, and I'd like to think I have integrity too, but I'm more of the like creative ideas, throwing out ideas, we were definitely yin and yang, but he let me be me, which I so appreciated. And ultimately, at the end of the day, whatever style you have to deliver results, right? Because when we sold Lead Dog, I remember saying like, what's going to change? And it was like, they didn't buy us because we're a camp, like we're a company. So if we don't perform, like I may not be sitting up here next year, who knows? So I definitely went into it with eyes wide open. And look, there's definitely challenges with integration and different things. And it goes back to what's that chemistry of teammates is to me totally Trump's strategy every day of the week. But I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, no, listen, the math exercise of an acquisition is the easy part. The integration, the culture assimilation, the blending of two companies, even though on paper the synergy is patently obvious, the reality is that effort to integrate, to culturally align, to figure out how all the puzzle pieces fit together to make a greater whole than the sum of the parts, that's the challenge. That's where the art of M&A departs from the science of the math exercise and the numbers, right? So you go through that. Obviously, at a certain point, you and Matt decide it's time for you to move on. I'm assuming that. And then you start Underdog. So quickly through the transition of your exit, and then I want to, hear the thumbnail on Underdog and what you're doing now.
Sure. You go through different stages, and I want everything to sound roses. I mean, I struggled with the integration at the beginning big time. And I tried to, and I'm someone who wears my heart on my sleeve, but I tried to, the things that were the challenges with that, what I tried to do is not have anybody else from Lead Dog feel that and keep those things the same. But then, sometimes the lesson for me is you have to work through things, and then it's kind of like it's darkest before the dawn, right? And you never know when around the next corners when things open up. And my wife, my beautiful wife, Michelle, had said to me when joining, it's new adventures, right? And you're going to have new experiences. And in some cases, you're going to thrive. And in others, I made a bunch of mistakes. And I'm sure there's people who said this guy's, a clown and not doing whatever. But I ended up, it's like that new adventure of suddenly I didn't join thinking I'm going to become North America CEO. That ended up evolving. And suddenly being on the global board. And then you get new life experiences like Sebastian Coe, Seb Coe, who was on the board, and I've become, another mentor of mine and learned so much from him and, feel like a lifelong friend now. And, we brought Rugby World Sevens to AT&T Park, and then Yankees Red Sox to London, the different life experiences that paired with career. Separate from all the beautiful people got to work with from around the globe, that wasn't happening when Lead Dog did things global, but we didn't have the global footprint of staff. So I think with the decision to want to start Underdog was kind of rooted in a couple things. I was fortunate to be working with David Stern and John Kozner when David was in, post-commissioner, his venture group. And so it was a little bit surreal because I had worked there in my 20s, and suddenly Dave and John were recommending us to work with startups. I felt like as we had gotten bigger at CSM, I was ready to be small again. And some of the things that were paying the bills in big ways, the big brands like Diet Coke, I was always getting more energized by working with Will, the founder of Whoop, and Drone Racing League when they were first starting, and worked on the Professional Fighters League with Carlos Silva, who was CEO at the time. And it was like, if they don't sell out the event we're working on with them at Madison Square Garden, they're going to maybe go out of business. There was just an energy to that and an impact where you're so accountable. But also there was the aha moments of, and it goes back to the foot in the door. I got the foot in the door at the Astrodome because my fraternity brother's dad was the president, right? And how often does that happen with whether economically, socially advantaged individuals? I grew up in this like wealthy, town on Long Island where those opportunities that don't get opened up for everybody else. And I literally had this, a number of epiphanies, but sitting at the Sports Business Awards one year, we had been nominated a number of years in a row for Sports Experiential Agency of the Year. Started to feel like Susan Lucci on Days of Our Lives, like we're never going to win. And I never prepared speeches because I'm superstitious, so I would fumble. But I remember looking around the room at the sea of guys who looked like you and I I think it was a black tie that year in tuxes. And I just read that 70% of the athletes are diverse in sports. But if you said who are the most diverse agencies with diverse ownership that are nationally known, not to take away from any small niche great groups, and there really wasn't an answer. One time in 2 years when I started seeding it, someone mentioned Rock Nation, Jay-Z's company. And there's the athlete venture groups like Spring Hill Entertainment, LeBron's group, and SC30, Steph Curry, and 35 Ventures, Kevin Durant, great groups. But I'm like, wow, there's a gap in our industry. And part of it, I wanted to end up creating an environment that created opportunities literally for underdogs. And underdogs for us is a mindset, right? So It's like, the mindset of when you're the underdog, that you're never taking, I'm a big believer, what we did previously, was fortunate to work with Oprah Winfrey for 8 years doing her biggest events. And it's like, guess what? That means crap tomorrow when we start working for someone. Right. But that I was at the Olympics, like, who cares? Like, I don't want to be in the rearview mirror, like, what's his name in St. Elmo's Fire, where you're like back on college campus, Rob Lowe. It's like, what's the present and what's the future? And like, when someone hires you, take very seriously, like they're putting their trust and money into you. So wanted to create an environment that, big believer of the best innovation comes when there's the most diversity and diversity of perspective, of life work experiences. So I'm intrigued when I meet someone who's been an artist, or we just hired someone who took a year off and was a DJ. Because guess what? If you have a sea of sameness of thinking, and look at what sports is part of culture now. So like being a sports marketing agency, the best sports marketing agencies, I think, will be sports culture agencies. Just as comfortable in media and fashion and culinary and all the things that are tied into it. So that's ultimately what we're trying to build at Underdog. And again, want to be known as the best, not the biggest, but known as like, if you work with them, they're going to stay true to their word and what they say they're going to do. And then be obsessed with finding those things that someone even doesn't expect from the relationship to bring added value that they can point to. Ideally, then you get to the space where you're indispensable. And anytime they have a big challenge, they're like, we don't know what to do. It's like, call Underdog. It's like, pick up the bat phone to Underdog.
So is it fair to say that Underdog, the group you have created and now oversee, is sort of a sport, entertainment, media, art, cultural agency that sort of sits at the hub, if you will, of all those disparate, call it industries? But then there's also the brand overlay and the activation overlay and the event delivery and production, all those kinds of things.
Yes, I think I would tweak that. The brand overlay, all those experiences can be created for a brand, whether that's, Nike or Red Bull or, whatever brand you're working with. But the brand also can be a sports property. It can be, Major League Baseball, who we're fortunate to work with. It can be a startup league like World Sevens Football that we just produced a really special event in Portugal, in Cascais, which I highly recommend visiting. But as an example, we produced the Susan G. Komen Gala last night. That was a high-end hospitality experience, fundraiser with the programming and design and thematics. So for us, it's like integrated sports marketing and culture company in 3 core areas: brand experiences, integrated marketing solutions, and strategic partnerships. And I say strategic partnerships because, yes, when we can help drive revenue, but a lot of it's like, how can we bring the partner into something that maybe is amplifying the marketing, using someone's existing assets, like truly creating a partnership that's not just about transactional. I think too much of our industry is transactional, and those end up being one-off relationships versus saying, what's the partnership that can be no money changing hands between a brand and maybe a nonprofit or a celebrity? Like, where do you find that, like, that common area that everybody gets excited about? That's the space we try and be Switzerland, right? We're trying to bring groups together, and then it's like build on them. We love, and that's why we say integrated brand experiences.
Right.
Because
Well, that's admirable, because Switzerland's a hard thing to emulate. I mean, it's really hard to be Switzerland on a consistent basis, but I applaud the effort, Dan. We're looking forward to seeing all the cool things that Underdog does over the next X number of years. But listen, we've got just a few minutes left, and I want to ask you the same three questions I ask everybody who's on this show. First question is, and you've probably already alluded to it, is your favorite mistake. This is that moment in your career where you really sort of screwed the pooch, right? I mean, you made a big faux pas, but you recognized it, you learned from it, and you took those learnings forward.
I'm not saying this to be like self-deprecating, but I feel like I've made so many mistakes. And at Underdog, some of the same mistakes I made that then I'm like, wow, like, you know, because I do believe in, like, you learn from your mistakes and you apply. I think something I try and pass forward now that I didn't do, like when I switched over to the WNBA, I feel like I didn't do a great job when I first got there. And I felt like I was in a new role, and I was fortunate to have like strong success in different roles, moving to Toronto, moving to Atlanta. And I feel like I didn't have a roadmap to what to do. So I ended up doing over here, over there. And I think I ended up spending a lot of time and energy towards things that were in front of me, almost like churning, because I didn't know what to spend the right time on. So I do think I learned the hard way through that, of like, when there's a lot of things to what to decide what to do, like taking that step back to think what's most important, WMI, right? And
First things first.
And the art of sacrifice, right? So in the scheme of things, if you don't do 6 things, but you do these 3, what's going to really matter, whether that's to the consumer or to the partner, or in the case of the WNBA, I was working with the 8 teams. And then just really also taking accountability. I think one of the things, you know, what I've found over the years, and there's only been a few times where I feel like someone's ethics, it's scary when you are open and honest with someone and then you realize the person on the other side of the table doesn't operate with the same life compass you do. That's when you're like, oh crap. 99% of the time, when you're open and transparent, if something screws up, like I remember with Oprah's 10th anniversary, we had a major screw up with tickets. We stayed up all night pairing these tickets at Radio City, and it was a major screw up. And I sat at the event, I sent our staff home and sat at the table and took down all these, mostly women, their emails and gave them extra books, and like, you know, couldn't make right what the problem was, but like, how can we actually like do something in response to this? And I remember thinking we were going to get fired, and I went outside the Radio City Music Hall, the client. She had seen what we did and how we responded to the situation, and she was right there with us. And it was like, wow, like that was telling, because I thought, oh, she's taking me outside to say, get the hell out of here.
Right. Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Thank you for that. Second question is, and you've been to more events than most, this is the live concert, live show that you attended where a female artist or a female-led band was the headliner.
Interesting. Well, last night's event had me in tears because, do you know the Susan G. Komen song, like the fight song?
I don't, but...
Well, I'll send it to you. I don't want to misspeak her name, but the creator of the song, and it's been for a decade, Susan G. Komen's fight song, she played that live last night and then invited breast cancer survivors on stage. It's pretty amazing in terms of the energy in the room. But I've been fortunate to work a number of events. I mean, Lady Gaga in Miami at the Super Bowl was pretty special. But actually, this is going to sound funny, this speaks to culture. Mary Chapin Carpenter at a Be Creative Festival for Country Home Magazine in Central Park was pretty special as well in a small environment. Sometimes I think people think a Super Bowl or the big sexy thing, and I made the mistake of mentioning Lady Gaga at Super Bowl. But actually the most memorable, would be Donna Summer at the first event I ever did for Lead Dog in Fenway, reminding her that there was going to be a flyover of planes when she was singing the anthem. And literally, when the planes came over so low over Fenway Park, I've never, I've never seen someone jump higher because they were so low and so loud, and the building shook. I will never forget Donna Summer almost jumping out of her shoes.
Well, man, Donna Summer at Fenway Park, two icons. That's a great call out. I love that one. Okay, so the last one. This is my favorite. Not everyone's, but mine. This is your favorite word. The word that, you know, if you had to pick one out of the air, put on the whiteboard as a touchstone, what would that word be and why?
Two things come in my head right away. Love comes in my head, and carpe diem comes in my head. And I think carpe diem 365. And I'm a huge believer of, like, you know, as I read more about Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius recently, it's like everything is about how you respond to things. You can't control what goes on outside you. I met a woman last night who was a stage 4 cancer survivor that spread to different parts of her body. And the positive energy she had and the chutzpah was like just the most inspiring thing. I just think when you meet people that have that energy, I always look for that chip, that thing in people's heart. Like Rodney, who is a friend of mine now, who sells leather goods outside Balthazar. Anybody coming to New York, Balthazar, an iconic New York institution,
Love it.
Go outside. Rodney's there every day, and he sells leather goods. I mean, this guy's a workhorse. He's there 12 hours a day, rain or shine. The most positive person I think I've met, like, in my life. And the guy just oozes. You want to be around him. It's like a, you know, magnet drawing you towards. Like, so carpe diem to me is that. It's, you know, Goodwill Hunting, suck the marrow out of life. And I love when you meet people that you're just like, wow, like, you're this way. When I saw you in LA, I introduced Carl, I'll talk to you third person, to a young woman who was attending her first sports conference, who was super nervous. She was really smart and sharp, but I could tell nervous. So I talked to her for a while. I introduced her to Carl. And Carl wasn't like looking over her shoulder going, who do I need to get to for whatever? Genuinely, like, showed interest in her, started talking to her. To me, that's what life's all about. When, like, you never know who the next person you meet is going to be, just like a lifelong friend like Rodney in front of Balthazar.
Well, we've all been there. And thank you for the shout out, but it's nothing you wouldn't do if I introduced you to someone in the same manner, shape, and form. That's the sort of benefit we have as old dogs-ish, right?
Because that's my next company, Old Dog.
Right. We've been around the block enough times to know that we all start somewhere, and that a kind word, a clear, attentive listen to a story, you know, changes lives. It's just that simple.
It's so true. It's so true.
So we're going to say that love for this day, love on Carpe Diem Day, is the way we're going to leave this. You've been awesome. I cannot thank you enough for joining us today on the Best Boss Ever podcast.
Thank you. Seeing all the inspiring leaders that I'm fortunate to know, a number of them you've had on, from Dr. Schiller to Matt Vandrow and Bill Carter, and on and on. Keep doing what you're doing, Carl. Thank you for the opportunity to share stories with you.
It's my pleasure, Dan, and I'll leave you with two other ones. Harlan Stone and Seb Coe were both also former guests on the pod. So if you haven't heard them yet, it's worth a listen.
Well, it's where sometimes, again, imposter syndrome, or I'm like, you should have probably tiers of the podcast where put me in the bucket where, like, listen to if you're really bored, and versus like the Seb and Harlan.
All good, man. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.